Welcome and good morning. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Nesta Talks To. These events are put on by Nesta and are designed to be a conversation with today's most interesting thinkers and doers, focused on the big topics that define our future. I'm Mariah Sloan, Nesta's Chief of Staff. I work on strategy and thought leadership, and with our Senior Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion lead, I also am on the line to make sure that Nesta is advancing progress on our equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy. I'm really pleased to welcome Bayo Adelaja to discuss diversity in entrepreneurship and innovation. It's great to see you. The entrepreneurship sector is notoriously, depressingly undiverse. And I think there's been a spotlight on addressing inequity and improving diversity, with immense credit to the activists, champions, and leaders across the world who have been and continue to be demanding and driving this change. But we're still really far from it being a level playing field. And Bayo's work aims to level this playing field and expand opportunities and support available to Black entrepreneurs in particular and innovators. She is chief doer at Do It Now Now, the company she founded in 2016 to champion ethnic diversity in entrepreneurship, creativity, and philanthropy in response to the gaps and disadvantages in the support available to Black innovators building tech companies and social enterprises across Africa and in the UK. In 2018, Bayo was named one of the most influential women in social entrepreneurship in the UK by NatWest Bank. She's been given several awards by Durham, Harvard, and Oxford University's business schools for her work to create opportunities for underserved communities through technology. I think Bayo is a change maker and a role model for letting your life speak. And I feel really privileged to be with her and all of you in the audience this morning. Bit of a housekeeping. We're both really keen to make this as much of a conversation as this medium allows. And so please do post your questions or reflections in the chat. I will start off with a few questions of my own, but then we'll turn to those in the audience to ask and respond to your questions. So to start us off, you, Bayo, used the phrase, "the future needs us all." Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, because it is a necessary conversation. I find that we've kind of turned diversity, innovation, open innovation, all of these things into buzzwords and into things that people are now kind of treating like a hashtag that is a trend that is now played out and we should all be sick of. Like, I don't know the word slay, but it's game changing. It's life changing for people that are benefiting from the activity and the innovation that is seeking to be diverse, intersectional, and inclusive. As an organization, we use the tagline, "The future needs us all," because in looking at the future that we're creating, if you look at the way that technology particularly, or the impact sector, has shaped the world that we exist in over the past 20 to 30 years, you'll notice that a few people, really just enough to fill a physical private members club in the center of London, likely, have decided what this future that we are currently existing in looks like. The decisions they made, whether at governmental level, at venture capitalist level, local government, leaders of large-scale charities, national organizations, they've all decided who we are and what we believe in as a community, but they aren't representative of the entire community. And if we are going to build a world that is truly fit for purpose, we need it to be representative. We need those decision makers. We need those decisions to be representative of the needs and ideals of everybody that is going to be engaging with it. So the future needs us all is about recognizing that one group of people can't know everything, can't experience everything, and certainly can't reflect everything that is necessary to be reflected in this future we seek to design. So all of us are needed at the table. It might be to different levels and to different levels, engagements and different types of engagement, but all of us need space at the table and opportunities to achieve our own change, whether that's small scale, being a neighborhood group leader, or large scale to running a £1 billion fund or something. It's important for everybody to have the resources that they need to step up and do what they think is right, and naturally that society will work towards or against that to kind of create an equilibrium.
Couldn't agree more, and I really appreciate the sort of painting the picture of the sort of future that is much more inclusive and has a lot more diverse voices at the table and in positions of decision making. You've been recognized for actually your work in breaking down the boundaries and empowering people from minoritized backgrounds to be part of those decision making, to be part of building businesses that define our future. So can you just dig in a little bit more and tell us what exactly do you do, and how did you get into this work in the first place?
Sure. So I'll talk the entry point. I'll go with the entry point first. In 2016, I was working at the London School of Economics after having started that was my first job after university. I had done a master's in sociology, focused on culture and society, because while I was at university, my undergraduate degree, I was just fascinated by how people came together and stayed together and started a tech company around that to support people to find themselves and find each other and build community together and kind of support each other to create shared goals. And what I found was, as I was working in this space and seeking to really focus on social care and social impact and ensuring that the government knew what they wanted to do when it came to supporting people with degenerative mental health issues, supporting them to live in their communities a lot longer than be institutionalized, for instance. I recognized that the people that we were talking to, the organizations that we were working with, the people that were leading these conversations weren't a diverse group of people. And it meant that if there was a group of, for instance, Black or Asian people with dementia who needed very specific support that was culturally sensitive and would be more effective for them, that wasn't on the table because no one was talking to them about it. No one was asking those questions, and there were no organizations that was deemed to be of the standard level or worthiness, I suppose, of being able to be part of those conversations. So when I started Do It Now, I started it with the purview to essentially just infrastructurally support and finance organizations that were left out of the conversation, with an assumption at that time that the reason that they were being left out was because they were not good enough. They had not met the bar. That's what I started with. And then over time, recognized that was the lie. That was the lie that was being perpetuated. And this is no fault of LSE. I'm not trying to come at LSE. They're a great organization. I did enjoy my time there. But I recognize that we have kind of perpetuated this falsehood that there is a type of organization that should be given the opportunity to make a difference. And when I started looking into that and reorganized and reframed our work in terms of our work in Africa and our work in the UK and what we're trying to do, that's when Do It Now became what it is today, which is an open innovation racial justice organization that seeks to focus on the Black community across the UK and Africa to create solutions that are specific to the needs of those populations within a cross-section of what our actual ability as an organization is. So our focus on entrepreneurship, financial inclusion, employability, and leadership skills comes from my own experiences in those spaces, my own expertise in those spaces, and our ability to grow outside of that into a way that doesn't lead to mission creep. So we can't say we are, although we say we support Black people, we aren't all things to all Black people. Within the demographic of Black people, we seek to find our niche in that and support that so that there is more space. And we work in entrepreneurship because if you support an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, for instance, to start a subsidized childcare collective for Black single mothers or other low income level single mothers in a local area. You are not only supporting that entrepreneur to create something that's sustainable and can pay their salary and help them and their family to be more financially sustainable, you are also contributing to an entire ecosystem that they are building into. So that's the work that Do It Now does, and that's how we position ourselves today.
That's amazing. And just to help sort of bring this a little bit to life for anybody in the audience who maybe perhaps hasn't come across Do It Now, can you tell us about a particular program or initiative that you are most proud of, or that you think really exemplifies sort of the work that you do and what you're trying to achieve?
You know, I genuinely hate it when people say that your business is your baby. But when you asked me to pick my favorite, I was like, oh no, my babies. I couldn't possibly pick one between all of them. Oh goodness. Okay, so I'll pick two if that's okay, because then it shows the spectrum. So one of them, specific to the UK, we are just focused on that for now. But one of them is Common Core. So we run a grant fund and an infrastructure support organization in Common Core that supports about 1,000 Black-led charities and social enterprises to access expert cohort-based training, one-to-ones with those same experts in key skills and to give them access to key skills as well as information and resources that they may not have access to otherwise. All of the work that we do with our community members is free to them. We fundraise for that work and we grant money. So we have to date committed £348,000 in grant funding to, I want to say 46 Black-led charities and social enterprises across the UK. That could be wrong. I don't lead on that work. But then the flip side of that is a program that we call My Moon Landing, which is a leadership skills focused program that supports Black women, Black LGBTQ, and Black non-binary people at the very early stages of their community leadership journey. So it's targeted at people that are maybe doing something, they're volunteering in a number of places across their community, they are seeking to make a change, but have not necessarily taken that first step into building their own organization, or they have taken that step, but they're kind of at a kind of plateau in terms of where does it go, and so essentially where I was in the beginning, where you're then in it and you're like, oh wait, the things I thought before are not necessarily what they actually are. So it's supporting them to access a very, very early stage inspiration stage, access to resources, skills, and people that have been there and done that can help them think through how they could potentially build their organization and what it could look like in 5 years.
Brilliant. You mentioned that some of the work that you do now is also inspired by your own experience, and in particular thinking about this program, My Moon Landing, and what you just said about connecting or sort of inspiration stage leaders, if you will, with people who have been there and done that. One question that I love asking guests about is in terms of how they got into the work that they do, is about your mentors. And so did you have any mentors? And if so, what did you learn from them?
So I had some, I have mentors in the way that they don't know that they're mentoring you. It's a bit sneaky. But I
mentors.
Yeah, I think so. So I have some really fantastic people that have helped me see things through and see things better. I didn't actually have many mentors in the beginning because I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to ask for from a mentor. I was just kind of meandering my way through and hoping for the best, and kind of just honestly thinking I knew everything already. And just because I built a startup, I'd been working in this research space, I'd been working in the sector I was interested in going into, and I had my own experiences. So I just thought, oh, I know what I'm doing. Let's go for it and see how it does or doesn't do. And it was when I started really needing mentors, and needing focused support and really needing to talk to people beyond my peers. So I suppose I focused more in the early stages. I focused a lot more on peer-to-peer relationships and learning from people that were going along this journey alongside me in the same kind of in the trenches together and learning from each other. And that was extremely helpful. But when I started looking for mentors that were much further along, it was that growth stage of Do It Now. And I suddenly realized I'd had no peers that I could look to and say, you are doing a one-to-one of exactly what I'm looking to do. And if they were doing something relevant, it wasn't as tailored as I needed to be. And yeah, it was just really difficult to find comps for Do It Now, which was really frustrating at a point. So I ended up finding a group of really awesome people. Like there's my friend Christine. We met at a conference, and she was just like, "Yeah, I'm gonna help you speak at this other thing that you were great at this. I'm gonna help you speak at this other thing." It kind of grew like that, and now I have my mentors are people that have been running international organizations for 15 to 30 years and are kind of at the point of retiring or have retired and are now like, hey, you're doing stuff. Let's talk it through. And when COVID hit, that was extremely important because I had on a really, really bad week, I don't know if they sensed it, but they all just called me and we had really long conversations about the length of their journey. And they just talked to me through the beginning to where they are now, all of them. And it really helped because at that point, Do It Now would have closed if I didn't have those conversations because I was so tired of how hard it was. But yeah, that was a ramble answer, but I hope it got there in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said probably resonates with a lot of people who are listening around sometimes not being sure what to ask for, and so not necessarily looking for mentors, but also the peers and the relationships that we have with our friends actually really sustain us and enable us to achieve the things that we set out to do and sort of persist. So big shout out to Christine and to the other friends who called you during that week. I want to pivot the conversation bio a little bit, and I'd like to turn to diversity and entrepreneurship. And in the UK, 10 Black women have been funded by venture capitalists in the past decade, and only 38 Black people in total have been funded by venture capitalists in the past decade. And this was research that you shared with me from Extended Ventures study that was published last year. So I'd like to sort of think about, where does this start? What do you think we should be doing from a government policy perspective at the highest levels to be able to better support and create the right create a better environment that enables Black innovators to thrive and get started and access funding?
I think it starts, if we're going to go from a governmental perspective, I think it's a local government issue with national funding allocated to ensuring that there are active programs to support young Black people specifically, but people that are off the beaten path of the traditional look and feel of an innovator or entrepreneur or whoever it might be, to engage in after school programs, in entrepreneurship building programs, in small grants and competitions to support them, to activate that part of them in a way that is not necessarily encouraged by culture or due to sexist barriers, which is why I think there's a significantly lower number of Black women in the tech space as opposed to Black people in general, though the challenges are somewhat the same. And I think it's about ensuring that there is enough awareness as to what is already happening, because there are some really great councils out there who have been on this trajectory for a very long time, but have not done a great job of sharing that information or those opportunities, likely for fear of being inundated with requests because they have a finite number of resources and a kind of burned out team. So being able to properly resource the outreach activities of local councils, being able to properly resource collaborative work with local organizations who can champion those young people so that we can end up in a space in 10 years where we can see a significant jump in that. That is the type of governmental commitment and policy that I would like to see. There are lots of things that are needed to jumpstart it at this point, because I mean, I remember uh, kind of asking someone. I think it was I was speaking at GLA event, and I just kind of threw it out there. What would happen if we had something like a minority version of the EIS or SEIS tax opportunities for investors? Would that be something that could possibly come forward in the future? Because there are things that could jumpstart investment into Black-led and other people of color-led organizations today. There are, I mean, dormant account money that funds a lot of the grant making in this country. There is reason to believe, I think, that part of that money could be allocated to organizations, not a plug, but not that far off of a sensibility. Why don't we get dormant account money for Common Core? Like, I know we're a small organization, but we could do it if you just gave us the money and the time. So there are organizations that would welcome the opportunity, but the gulf to get into those rooms and even speak to those people in the first place is really difficult. There's an organization that used to be a comp for Do It Now, a few years ago, that launched at the House of Commons or at Downing Street or something like that. And every day that I've not stepped into Downing Street as the founder of an organization, I look at it as like, we are 5 years behind where that organization started. And I know it isn't a sensible comparison in that context exactly, but I do think there is something to be said about the fact that we are doing a lot of work that a lot of organizations, white-led, with lots really great networks and opportunities and entry points. We're doing the same work with more people. I don't know if it's more impact. That's to be discovered, I'm sure. But we don't get the same opportunities by far. We don't get the same respect by far. And that, I think, is a sort of thing that I would like to see change, and not just for our benefit, but for the entire sector, I think.
That segues really well into sort of a next question, as I imagine there's some people in the audience who are from leaders or work in accelerators, incubators, venture capitalists, philanthropy, or in government, maybe in local government, which you said was so important. So I want to ask you, what should we be doing to help equalize and expand opportunity, to make sure that the opportunities are there for leaders of Black-led organizations who are, as you said, doing a lot of the work at equal scale and impact?
So could you repeat the question? I've got a delivery, I think, which is so.
It always happens when we're working from home. You get a ping or a delivery or a
Gosh.
I was just gonna ask, so for many people in the audience and listening who will listen after this recording, maybe working in or leading accelerators, incubators, venture capital, philanthropy, and what would you want these people and us all to be doing to better equalize and expand opportunity for Black-led and minoritized community-led organizations? What are some specific things that you would want us to do? And if you need to get your doorbell,
I think I need to get that. So can I just go on a?
Yes, please pause.
Break? Yeah,
absolutely. Grab your doorbell, and while Bio is sorting that out, I would just ask if anybody in the audience has questions for Bio. Please put them in the chat. This is a great opportunity to just take a moment, reflect on what you might want to hear from her, and we'll be getting to audience questions in just a few minutes.
Goodness. Thank you for the question and the grace in that situation. Anyway, I think there are certainly lots of things that organizations that make up the ecosystem can do to ensure that they are being inclusive and intersectional in their thinking and their support of innovations that are coming from places that they don't usually see innovations come from. It's about recognizing that the things that you value as an organization, the team that you have hired to do this work, may not know everything about what is coming out and what the problems are at a local level. One of the challenges that Black-led organizations across different sectors face when they're trying to do this work and trying to get access to opportunities and resources that are held in these spaces is that their ideas and the market or the impact that they're trying to bring is not valued because it's not understood. One of the easy references for that comes from the tech space, actually, where people, lots of Black women are building tech startups that have to do with hair care, accessories relative to that space, the consumer beauty space. Now, when you recognize that the personal experience leads to the innovation that you bring forward. So if you know that you are spending $600 or so on a year on your hair, or even a month in some people's cases, if you know that you're spending that much money on your hair, you know 10 people that are, and then you can do your own research to understand what beauty supply stores are doing. Despite the fact that it is not mapped traditionally, you can do your own research to understand that it is a viable sector to go into. But if it is not mapped traditionally, the VCs won't value it because they don't trust it. They don't trust you're an independent researcher. They don't have the space or the time to do that research themselves. The same comes when it's an impact organization that says they want to significantly support work in X space. The onus is put on the impact organization to validate in the application that space. But if everyone has 1,000 words and I've got to teach you about an entirely new space of work in 1,000 words, whereas someone else is going to go in with an easier time because they don't have to educate you on the space, then we're not on a level playing field immediately in those two applications. So it's when you're thinking about what you can do and how you can support new innovations in new spaces, it's about talking to people. That's what an open innovation is about. It's about engaging people and talking to them and making sure that you understand where they're coming from and why they're building the things that they're building, and making sure you have that space for them to ask you questions and talk to you. I mean, for Common Call, we had the latest funding call, we had 600 applications and did 142 phone calls with our applicants. That is rare, unfortunately, within the space. One, to have that many applications, but two, to do that many phone calls, because unfortunately funders themselves are not that well, the capacity within the organizations is typically not that broad to be able to take on that kind of work. But if we start looking at that kind of work as necessary to the impact and necessary to the work that we're trying to achieve, or to the future that we're trying to build, then we'll organize our capacity differently to prioritize those things that mean that we're going deep into communities. We're talking to disparate groups. We're seeking to bring minoritized communities forward and center them in the application design, center them in the way that we're building our calls, and center them in the way that we're explaining these calls in the first place, wherever it may be, whether that's a Nesta challenge or it's a funding call, or if it's an opportunity for a contract somewhere.
That's excellent advice. And there's a pre-submitted question from Emily from the audience in the Royal Society of Chemistry, who asked, I run an innovation competition accelerator. How can I encourage more diversity in those that are applying? And I think you've given some suggestions just now, but wanted to see if there's anything else that you would want to add specifically around the sort of application process.
Well, specific to the application process, There are lots of different methodologies that can be used. You could start with a shorter application as an expression of interest that allows you to test for the diversity of the group that is applying, so that you know not whether you're meeting your targets in the first place. And then you can go out to specific groups if you find that you're not meeting those targets. So you're not necessarily waiting to the end of the application process to figure out if you're already if you're going to meet those targets or not. You could also ensure that you are talking to specific founders that you would be interested in encouraging an application from at that very stage of putting out the application process, or even designing the call. One of my favorite stories is Van Jones, who was at Harvard Law School, and he's an extremely well-respected activist and news broadcaster now. But at the time, obviously, he was just a student, same as everybody else studying Harvard Law. And he said he was doing his best. He was studying, he was writing his essays, he was submitting things, and he was being polite. He thought that's what you were supposed to do, and that's it. But it turned out that the professors were mentoring people, and they were introducing students to justices and to gain clerkships. And there was this whole subculture, not necessarily actually subculture, but there was this whole subtext of activity that was happening, that outside of his own awareness of how those things worked, because that wasn't his experience of them, he didn't know how to navigate these, like the fact that people invite you over to dinner and don't invite the whole class, they just invite the ones that they like. So he didn't know that he had to be liked by his professors. He just thought he had to be good at his work. And encouraging those spaces to be equal, where there's kind of little things that you do to support an application, where you just kind of have these ad hoc conversations, creating space for those to be neutral spaces where anyone can opt in for something, and really decoding that to see where you are getting the warm applications from, so that you can create more opportunities to have those warm applications come through.
I think great advice. And I think data has a massive role to play in this. And if you're really tracking your data, who is applying, what are their characteristics, how did they get founded, what kind of resources have they been able to draw on, both social resources as well as financial resources in the past, can, I think, also help really highlight where some of the gaps are and where you might be falling down in your efforts to sort of drive equity in an application process, for example. I'm going to turn to some audience questions. There was one here from Faisal, who asked, can you have inclusion without diversity? And wanted to sort of turn the conversation to reflect on inclusion as well. And perhaps you can respond to that question in particular.
I think it's entirely possible to have inclusion without diversity, but you would have to have very specific definitions of both. So if you're looking at diversity, you're thinking about it in specific contexts of this question, if you're seeking to separate the two. When you're looking at diversity, you're looking at it entirely as the numeric values associated with specific representations of demographics within a certain space. So it's the targets that you're setting and the ability to achieve those targets, that diversity. When you're looking at inclusion, and I always encourage our clients, our diversity and inclusion clients that we work with, to look at it from a perspective of being inclusive, because inclusion is at the base a set of principles or policies or practices that you invest in across your organization. So you can have in a policy, an accessibility support policy, for instance, where you provide, as a matter of course, you provide a sign language interpreter or captions to all of your video content, for everybody, no matter whether you know or you don't know that you have someone that would need them in the audience. That is inclusion. But being inclusive is consistently seeking to understand the audience, so understanding the diverse audience that is experiencing your activity, and then creating opportunities and resources and tools for them to help them engage better with what you're providing. So you can have inclusion without diversity, and you should have inclusion even if you don't have a diverse organization or a diverse base, because there is always diversity within whatever space you're working. No group is a monolith, no white group is a monolith, no Black group is a monolith. You have to figure out when you're looking at inclusion, you have to figure out what the needs are within the specific space and what you can provide.
If I can just ask a follow-up to that. From your experience, what were some of the most diverse and inclusive professional spaces that you've been a part of? And what were some of the characteristics of those spaces that really enabled you to feel belonging and sort of contribute your best ideas and feel really a part of it, engaged?
Honestly, I don't think nothing comes to mind in terms of being part of an inclusive space, or being particularly in a particularly diverse space. I've lived, I like to say I was moved to England when I was 10 rather than I moved, because I didn't make that decision, my parents did. So I was moved to this country, and I moved from being in a majority space where I had no concept of race, because everybody was Black and I had no understanding of what Black meant beyond. Actually, no, I didn't have any understanding of it at all. And it was only when I moved to the UK that I realized that I was Black, and I realized that I was Black in a vastly white community. We lived in London for about 3 months and then moved to Kent. And then from that point on, I was the only white person, certainly not. I was the only Black person in the room most days. And I just got used to racism. Like, it was like thinking about, I sometimes tell people about my experiences at school, and they get traumatized by listening. And it was normal to me. It was normal for racist jokes to be told by teachers. It was normal for racist jokes to be told by students and nothing happened. It was really normal to get accosted in the street. It was normal to, like, I grew up with those things. It didn't really faze me truly until I grew up and thought about it and realized how messed up that was. And then I went to Durham, which is a similar space, very, very white community, very, very white collegiate community as well. I was the only Black person in my, actually no, we were two. There was a mixed race girl. I don't think she had identified as Black though, but I was the only Black person that identified as Black within my college as well. So I've lived most of my life in those spaces. So I can't say that I've ever been truly in a diverse space that much. But then obviously living in London now, it's easier to breathe, I'll say. When you just kind of see people that look like you and you don't feel particularly like you stand out, you're like being watched. It's just easier to navigate. And the good things about being in a space that seeks to engage you is that you do feel engaged, but the negative aspect of it is that, unfortunately, historically, in my experience, not in my experience as a consultant or with our clients, but in my experience as a person that's been on the receiving end of inclusion initiatives, it's usually the person rather than the organization that's passionate about it. So if that person leaves or something changes or budgets get stripped, then that breaks down a little bit. So I haven't had personally, I haven't had a positive experience of most of these things, which is, I think, why I work in this space, because I'm so adamant that I don't want other people to experience the things that I have.
Thank you so much for sharing some of your own reflections on your experience. And I think it really shows just how far we have to go to create and foster diverse and inclusive spaces, and ensure that that isn't just because there's one person who cares and who's carving out budget for something to that effect, but to really make it systematic and built into the infrastructure of our organizations and institutions. So again, just thank you for sharing your own reflections just now. There was a couple of questions from the audience in the comments, and again, encourage others who are listening to please put your questions here. We do have some time But there was a question about, is Bio open to working with organizations outside of the UK from ESTA? And you do work outside of the UK, so I wondered if you wanted to share a little bit about some of your international work and who you partner with or what you do internationally.
Sure, absolutely. So we specifically focus on tech in Africa in terms of our international work. So we work with tech startups at the earliest stages of that work. So post-product, post-revenue is where we sit, but pre large-scale investment. So it's a very specific piece of work that we do, and that's because our mandate, our strategy in Africa is to catalyze employment, large-scale employment across the continent. So we work with tech startups, individual tech startups, to help them stabilize their work and to connect them with corporations, resources, and funding opportunities internationally, so in America and in the UK. Despite it being funding-wise, despite it being the smallest cohort that we work with, so it's about 10% of the number of organizations that we work with across a year. This year, we've worked with about 4,000 people, and I think we're working with about 20 African tech startups. Do that math, I don't know what it is, but percentage-wise. But they have gone on, the last cohort that we ran in 2020 have gone on to raise $4 million in the past year. And they are hiring like gangbusters, and some of them have moved to the UK to be able to continue that fundraising journey. Some of them have moved to the US, and are the founders, one founder representing those companies and setting up headquarters elsewhere so they can continue that international expansion, while also being able to expand in their own home country as well as across countries now with the Africa free trade agreement that's thankfully been put in place. So that's the way that we work. We work in partnership with corporations and organizations in the UK, predominantly actually, to provide mentors, finances, and resources to African tech startups. And we do work with organizations in the US, but we've tried to move back into working predominantly with UK organizations over the past 6 months.
Well, and while you're talking about partnerships and the other organizations that you work for, there's a question from Black Business Fundamentals. What is Bio doing to work with other Black organizations in the same space?
So one of my key goals as the leader of Do It Now is to ensure that we are not working in a silo. We do a lot of work with other Black-focused organizations because we are privileged enough. Like it's a rare space where I don't know how many organizations, Black-led organizations, that have a 7-figure budget. I was trying to count how many zeros that was. We're rare, and I don't like that we're rare. I despise it actually. And basically, my goal is to make sure that we aren't rare in the next 3 or 4 years, that we can see a significant amount of other Black-focused organizations raise their budgets, raise their team capacity, deep dive further into the work that they're doing, and be able to really solve the problem. Because we're finding in our research and our work with Black-led organizations, actually, we're just doing another round of focus groups. We're talking to, I think, 45 different Black CEOs over the next couple of weeks to talk about what their engagement is in civil society and what we can do to help them. But what we're finding is that without the access to tools and resources, people with a real passion to bring solutions forward are not able to do so, and they end up in prevention rather than cure. So they end up at the lightest touch level of what they actually want to do, because there isn't the level of funding, there isn't the level of support that they need. Like I say, we work with about 1,000 Black-led organizations. So we definitely, that's a center of our work, and we're investing a lot more in that. I was joking about some fundraising applications that I was writing before this call started, and we're currently doing quite a lot of work to design opportunities and we're trying to find the right funders to bring those forward, because we don't. One of the other things I'm adamant about is not trying to fit what we do into the funding landscape, but design what we want and then find funders that make sense for it. So hopefully I've gotten some interested people. So hopefully we'll have some good conversations and we'll be able to work with a load more Black-led organizations over the next few years.
Brilliant. I just want to ask you, you've made a commitment to open innovation, and this is something that is a big part of what you do at Do It Now. Can you say a little bit about sort of the role, what is open innovation to you, and what role does it play in supporting other organizations and sort of making sure that other Black-led organizations have the opportunity and access to the infrastructure that you've had and diversifying the space?
Absolutely. So the first thing, it's different levels for us. So the first one is I make myself as available as possible. It's actually, it's really easy to get in touch with me, a little bit too easy sometimes, but it's really easy to get in touch with me to have the conversation about what you need, what we can do to help you, how we can talk, how we can support you, or what resources we can share. The team is also very easy to contact if you need support for something. We share our learning on absolutely everything. We've been a bit slow to do that recently, and slow for us is like 3 months late as opposed to 1 month, which is what our usual target is. When we finish something, we share the learnings immediately, what went well, what went badly, and what you can do to improve on our experiences. We are consistently running focus groups and talking to different community members to ensure that we are understanding them as much as possible and that they can understand us as much as possible. And we're also really adamant about collaborating with our community members. So we have an online community that we work through, that we work more closely with. There's about 500 members in that that we understand and we seek to support more throughout the year. And then we have our programs where we consistently identify new organizations that we want to support or collaborate with. And we just share opportunities consistently. So open innovation for us is about making our learning, our experiences, our challenges, our opportunities as available as possible, while also supporting other organizations to do the same and bringing on board our clients and our partners to be able to tap into that work. Actually, we recently did a piece of work, we're just finishing it up with Nesta, where we were given a pot of money, and our entire model was about how we essentially bring 30, well, total 75, but really a core number of 30 organizations along that same journey as to what that should look like, how it should be provided, what it means to the community, what impact it should have, and how we should kind of evolve in this space. So having those conversations and building out that community engagement team, that's our biggest team. So it's really important to us.
Great. And a related question from Naomi. What are some of the most common areas of support that Black-led organizations need? And are they and how are they different from non-Black-led organizations?
So Black-led organizations typically have the same needs as lived experience-led organizations. So if you look at the typical person who starts a charity or a social enterprise or a tech company, or some kind of innovation community based on art, it's one of two types of people. They either have lived experience of an issue or have compassion for the issue, or see it as an opportunity to do something that they work in a space that they enjoy and solve a problem and get paid while doing it. So the people that are coming at it from a perspective of, I don't have a personal experience of this, but this is a good problem to solve. Those people are typically middle upper class people who have the ability to earn less money because they have parents who can support them. They have good savings. They maybe have some inheritance from their grandparents. They have stuff that means that they are able to engage in a space without a lot of burden financially. And then there are people that are on the flip side of that, who have lived experience of an issue, who are devastated by a challenge that they have experienced or they have seen their family members go through, and they are not coming at it with an understanding of the sector. They're not coming at it trying to run an impact organization or a big company or anything like that. What they're doing is trying to solve a problem for the people around them, and then they fall into funding conversations. They fall into impact measurement. They fall into trying to get contracts and building revenue. So they come at it from a how did I get here, and with a kind of mental existential crisis of how am I leading this conversation now? How am I now the person that is making change and trying to make all this? Why are all of these people suddenly relying on me? It's a very different experience of the sector, and the sector itself is built for the people who know how to run organizations, who come at it wanting to run an organization and start from that perspective. One of the reasons that Do It Now failed truly for the first 2-3 years of its inception, 2.5 years of its inception, was because I had no idea we were registered incorrectly. I had no idea. No one told me. That is something I would have known if I was the former, if I was the person that came into this sector knowing, and I thought I knew. I really did. I thought I knew everything and I was fine. But if I'd come into the sector with the background, with the networks, with the things that most people have, if I'd been one of those people that could launch it Downing Street, I'd have a very different experience of this sector. So the areas of support are, everyone needs to understand income generation. Everyone needs to understand branding and marketing and comms and all of those things. It's the way you present it, the way you market it, the way you build that information, the direction that you take with it, the expectations you have of the people taking part in those programs. All of those things are different. The content is usually pretty much the same.
And I think that also circles back to the first point you made when we first started speaking about, who are the decision makers and how are they setting the sort of infrastructure that we live in and that our institutions are shaped by. And if those decision makers and that decision making group isn't diverse in the first place, then we will continue to sort of perpetuate some of these barriers. I'm going to take one last question from the chat, and we won't get through all of them, so apologies for that, and then we'll wrap up in the next couple of minutes. This is a question from Nina. I meet employers who have the best intentions, but are quite blind to how non-inclusive they are. Where would you start in such a situation?
Oh, that's difficult, because if they don't know, you have to be able to admit you have a problem, because they have to be able to allocate funding to it to be able to fix that problem. So if there are employers that don't know that they have a problem, they're pretty much a lost cause, honestly. And I don't think it's up to a person of color or a diversity and inclusion consultant or whoever to convince you that you have a problem in terms of how inclusive you are or how diverse you are. Because honestly, that we've tried for, I want to say, decades to convince employers to be diverse in their hiring practices, to be inclusive in their onboarding and retention. And if you just are refusing to see it, you are the problem at that point. And that's when you kind of get these conversations about, like, oh, if only the board would change, if only the CEO would leave, if only the SMT would change. And like, at that point, honestly, my starting point would be to just understand whether or not they are actually blind to it, or if they just don't know where to start and are paralyzed by the kind of awareness of it and are just too scared to make the wrong decision, which is a real thing. I sometimes get disappointed by organizations that I used to really love when they don't do something or aren't doing something. And I found that it's usually because they're too scared to make the wrong move that they end up doing nothing, because they're talking about it. they just end up talking about it over and over again within their team, and therefore make no external movement or no policy movement or practice movement. So figure out if that's the issue. If that's the issue, then yeah, that's solvable. You just find the right, convince them to pay someone to take that on and make the recommendations and implement. But if they don't know, then no one is, and particularly if it's a private company, no one is going to be able to force them to shift their hand, unfortunately. If people are willfully ignorant, then I have a theory that I work towards, that I explain our work in terms of diversity and inclusion, in terms of retention specifically, which is silence, violence, and escape. If you are not inclusive in your organization, you will face 3 experiences, particularly with your people of color. You will find that they become silent, so they become disengaged, and they're just there to collect the paycheck, and they will live for the weekends and for the end of the day, and they will do the bare minimum. And if you're okay with having people do the bare minimum in your organization, go for it. Violence is essentially people being a bit aggro, being really just not kind of obtuse and willfully obstructing the space. And that's likely one of the things that will happen before they escape, which is they leave. They just leave you in the lurch and go to another organization. And leaving you in the lurch doesn't mean they quit and then don't give notice and all that, which could happen. It happens all the time for many organizations, generally across non-people of color as well, obviously. But escape is about them going to another organization and you having wasted that money to recruit them, interview them, that capacity, all of that stuff, and having to do that again. So you're basically setting yourself backwards in terms of hiring and onboarding again. So if they're, I really just have no time for organizational leaders that don't care about diversity. I think I'm not here to convince you to care about something that is so obvious. And if you don't care, then I don't care about you.
Bayo, we have to close, but I just want to say an immense thank you. I think for me, this conversation has been, I guess, both future focused, helping us think about and imagine sort of what would things be like if decision-making circles were broader and more diverse and more inclusive, but also incredibly pragmatic at the same time as well, with really tangible advice for funders and others working in the space about expressions of interest and just getting on the phone and talking it through with applicants and examining the processes that enable people to succeed or that are incredibly opaque in what they're really asking for and making changes to that. So really immense thank you to joining us. Such a pleasure to speak with you. For those listening in, there's a link to a short survey in the chat. And in the events description. So please do let us know what you think. Your real-time feedback is incredibly invaluable. And just to close this out, the next Nesta Talks 2 event is with Joan Fitzgerald on the Green Revolution, how to make cities greener and fairer. And that is on October 7th. So we would really love to see you there. Thank you again to all of the wonderful questions in the chat, and Bayo in particular to you for making time to be with us today. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.